And in Gaza, the blockade itself, the persistence of the blockade, even in its current intensity, where some basic goods can enter, but still, for such a small economy, if you want to consider Gaza as sort of a sub-economy of the bigger Palestinian economy, you cannot have growth even in the order of 3-4% in the long run if it remains under such tight constraints. So if we look at the strategy of the Palestinian Authority now, what they aim to do is to do their utmost given the current conditions. That is, continue to build institutions, continue with improvements in the public finance management system, continue to shift the composition of spending from the social safety net to the more productive areas. But still, there are two key constraints which will actually restrain growth for this year and over the medium term, which is the expansion of the export market, first, and second, the use of the full area of the West Bank and the relaxation of this constraint that Area C cannot be used by the Palestinian private sector. So this is basically, I tried to distill the main messages without the usual kind of the technicalities or the numbers or the presentation of the full framework that we have used that you can read in our reports. But essentially, these are the main messages. And I encourage you to read carefully both our own work, the work of the IMF team, but also there are important strategies that have been presented by the Palestinian Authority, because there has been an important qualitative shift in the strategy of the Palestinian Authority to develop the Palestinian economy. I think there's very often a skepticism that while the Palestinian Authority cannot do much given the occupation, and therefore, anything that is presented in a positive light really is giving credit, or it's making it appear as if life could be conducted normally under occupation and you could have development under occupation. And I think this is my personal observation, it backfires in many ways. First of all, it really sends a message to people, to the Palestinians, that, well, look, you have the occupation, you have these constraints, there's not much you can do. The public sector is bloated, you have all these constraints on your daily activity, and so what is it that you can accomplish? I think the advantage of the vision that was presented in the 2-year plan is it showed what can be done despite the occupation, that you can have development. It doesn't mean that it's a situation that is ideal, or that should actually take can be accomplished in the longer run, or could lead in the longer run to sustainable growth. But nevertheless, it means that the Palestinians can improve their situation with very specific benchmarks and within a very clear vision, despite the constraints of the occupation. And so I think this is one of the important contributions that the current government in Palestine have made. That is, to look at the constraints and ask, what is it that could be done, and how can we make the best use of the external resources that we have to promote development. And that is especially important given that human capital has been severely degraded in the West Bank and Gaza. And this is something that I didn't, one of the surprises for me, going to live in Jerusalem a year ago, even though I had gone, I had been going on mission before, but coming and living in East Jerusalem and interacting with people on a daily basis, you see that you have a whole generation that has suffered in terms of human capital. Schools were deprived of the basic resources. Even if they had the resources, they were very often closed due to the conflict. The resources were diverted, as I said, from areas that, such as I mentioned physical capital, but human capital as well. Resources that would have gone to schools were diverted to just be able to provide the basic necessities for the population. So, and the strategy itself has a component that aims at developing human capital. And to allow, or to say, well, there's not much that can be done, and to allow this continued degradation weakens the population, and therefore makes it less able to resist the occupation in the longer run. So this is really the one of the advantages of having such a positive vision, identifying the forces that really exist and are operative, and seeing how these forces, despite the constraints, can lead to an improvement in the economic conditions. Something that was actually a vision that had never been presented before in such a way. And today we have criticism that how can you have such a vision when you have an occupation, and therefore it's directly or indirectly an endorsement of the occupation. So this is really the spirit with which, if you want to look at the strategy, you want to, when you examine the IMF reports or you examine the strategy that's presented by the Palestinian Authority, this is the way, I think, this is a useful way to look at it. And then second, I think it is not very helpful to start or to tend to use numbers to compare or to allow a comparison between the Palestinian economy and the other economies that have normal conditions. For example, I've read in several articles a comparison between the growth of the West Bank and Gaza and the growth of Singapore. You have extraordinary conditions in the West Bank and Gaza where you started with severe restrictions on the movement of people and the movement of goods, the absence of external outlets. Then you had the advent of the Palestinian Authority, and you have positive contributions by the donor community, and then some relaxation by the Israelis on internal movement. That was reflected in certain numbers. Those numbers have to be put in context, and they are not comparable to the numbers that we see in other economies that have witnessed such a high rate of growth. So I'm now open to any questions you have.